Hey everyone, welcome to Apocalypse Here, Christianity You Can Live With. I hope that y'all had a happy Thanksgiving and were in some way able to connect with your loved ones, even if you couldn't be there in person. Obviously a weird time to celebrate holidays, but I still hope your Thanksgiving was in some way good and memorable. Today we're going to do our third audience question video. I've had a couple questions about Universalism. I haven't put out a video explicitly about Universalism yet, but it's come up in various interviews I've done. And so a few questions have come in, and I've kind of condensed a couple of them and put them together for this video. So these questions come from Renee and Carlos. Renee asks, if Universalism is true, then what's stopping me from going on a killing rampage if I'll end up getting saved anyway? How is it that the mass killer will be saved without consequence? Which is a very common question to Universalists, so I'll tackle that. And then Carlos, why didn't the early church embrace universal salvation, parenthetically excommunicating Origen? So I'll address that afterward quickly. So what's really stopping us from committing sin? I'm going to address these in order, like I said. And I think Renee is asking two things, one about ethics and the other about judgment. And I could briefly answer this initial question by just saying that no account of salvation prevents someone from being a mass murderer. I don't think it really has anything to do with the truth or falsehood of universalism, right? I think what's going on here is much more basic. This concern, I think, is much more basic and common. The concern is with ethics, it seems to me. Is there any reason to be a good person if Jesus and the Spirit have done everything to save me and secure my place with God in perfection and fellowship forever? I think a dominant theological response to this has been kind of initial threat, the carrot and the stick. And this is really the way that some people parent their children. If you don't do the right thing, you'll be punished, but if you do the right thing, you'll be rewarded. But when you press into this account, it doesn't actually provide us with a strong ethical system, I don't think. You never behave rightly on this system because the thing you're doing is just good. And you never behave in the right way because the person asking you to do this is someone you just want to please. On this dominant kind of approach, you're just doing it because of self-interest, protection from harm, or desire for reward. Now, I think a lot of people set this system up with the best of intentions, and it's embedded in so much of Christian teaching. But I don't think this is how God relates to us as revealed in Jesus, as I've hopefully made clear in previous videos. God in Christ and by the Spirit has us in a strong and secure ethical arrangement, which is not based on a contract. If you do certain things, then you'll be rewarded. If you don't do certain things, then you'll be punished. It's a covenant, right? Where God says, I am permanently committed to you. I love you with an undying and unending love that you just can't grasp completely. And I have these really strong expectations about how you need to behave and respond to this love. Now, somebody can push back on this arrangement and walk away from it. People do this all the time. But what if God's love toward and in me awakens a love for God? Then the most important thing in my life is responding to this God, seeking God's will, and wanting to live like Jesus for its own sake. This is a very powerful ethical arrangement. Now let's think a bit more deeply about this. Think about the most important human relationships in your life, which are probably the most loving relationships too. Those are the things that hold you tightly and help you become a good person more than anything else. And these aren't contractual relationships. Now, the most important relationship in my life is with my wife, Laura. She's someone I'm worried about the most and genuinely want to please her because I love her and she loves me. We don't have a contractual relationship where if I do certain things, she punishes me. And then if I do certain good things, she rewards me. I just want to make her happy and to bring her joy in what I do and what I say. So let's say Laura is going away on a conference trip and I'm left by myself. What's preventing me from going out and sleeping with someone else while she's away? What if I didn't really love her and just had a contractual relationship with her? The only reason I did or didn't do these things was if I was going to get rewarded or punished. Think about what that implies if I'm alone while she's away and I'm tempted to do something sinful like cheating on her. I'd kind of have to sit down and calculate whether or not I'd be discovered or if something would go wrong. And then I'd probably decide I'll just behave because I think I'll probably get caught and it's not worth it. And then let's say she gets back from her trip and I go, "Hey, sweetie, while you were gone, I really thought about cheating on you. I had a lot of opportunities, but I thought about it and realized that the danger of you discovering that I cheated was too high. And since that would impact my life negatively, I decided not to. Otherwise, of course, I would do it." What would you think of me if I did that? What sort of marriage or covenantal relationship would this be? Well, it's not a marriage or a covenant at all. But this is how a lot of people think God operates. But this is actually a really terrible way to set up your ethical system. Now let's think about the same scenario. Laura's on a trip, and I'm by myself, and I behave myself. Why do I do that? Because I love her. If I cheated on her and betrayed her, think of the damage that this would do to the woman I love. Think of the pain, the suffering, the inappropriateness, and the infidelity. The act itself would just be horrible. I want to please her and to love her and to show my fidelity and commitment to her because I am in a covenant with her. This is how we're meant to behave in response to God and God's covenant that God has established with us from before all ages. This is the basis for striving to be a good person, to obey and seek God's will faithfully for its own sake. There is, of course, judgment in our relationship with God. And it may be helpful to kind of switch filial illustrations here to talk about parents and children. I don't have a child, but I am a son of two parents whom I love very much and am in a covenant relationship with. I've done things that have deeply, deeply grieved them with no thought of how my actions impacted them. But in those instances, they never ever stopped loving me or stopped being my parents. They're still my mom and dad. And I never ever stopped being their child. I'm still John. They never once excommunicated me from their presence or exerted irreparable and eternal violence on me for doing something wrong. I can tell you, though, there really isn't anything more judgmental than a loving and committed and caring parent. Nowhere is accountability more strict and the quest for honesty really more sustained than in a loving and covenantal family. There's going to be wrath there. Of course, there's going to be anger. But what's the anger aimed at in this kind of context? Would my parents aim their wrath and anger toward destroying me and sending me to a place where I'm tortured forever? No. It's aimed at restoration. It's a deep and loving anger affronted by my behavior. But it's ultimately aimed toward healing and mending our relationship. That's the purpose. And that's what God's judgment is like. It's aimed in that same sort of restorative way. Now, what about eschatological judgment? What about final judgment? I've talked about this in some other videos, but I'll rehash it here. I opt for something like the systematic approach that someone like Gregory of Nyssa advances in The Soul and the Resurrection and elsewhere, which I think coheres with exactly what I've been saying and what I've said previously about universalism. His approach is to see the seemingly kind of contrary eschatological expectations unfolded in the New Testament, not as two results of final judgment where you're either saved or damned, but as two different moments within the seamless narrative of the cosmos, two distinct eschatological horizons, one enclosed within the other. So one set of images marks the furthest limit of the imminent course of history and the division therein between those who have already surrendered to God's love and those who haven't yet. Now, that other set of images is that of the final horizon of all horizon beyond all ages, where even those who have traveled so far away from God as you can possibly go, through every possible self-imposed hell, will at last find themselves at the home to which they are called from everlasting, their hearts being purged of every last residue of hate and pride. Now, each of these horizons is absolute within its own sphere. One is the final verdict of the totality of human history, the first one. The other is the final verdict on the eternal purposes of God, just as the judgment on the cross is a verdict upon violence and cruelty and sin within human history, and the Easter verdict, the resurrection, is upon creation as conceived in God's eternal counsels. So we think of this in terms of eschatological discrimination between heaven and hell, but what if we put them more in kind of a sequence where one eschatological horizon comes first and the second comes after that and is the eternal horizon of all horizons? This way of seeing things, I think, accords with Paul's clearest eschatological vision, which we find in 1 Corinthians 15. At least Paul certainly appears to speak there, especially in verses 23 to 24, of three distinct moments distributed across two eschatological frames. In the first, in the process of final restoration of the created order in God. So, quote from 23 to 24, and each in the proper order, the anointed as the first fruits, thereafter those who are in Christ at his arrival, then the full completion when he delivers the kingdom to him who is God and the Father, when he renders every principality and every authority and every power ineffectual. Only at the very end of these three stages, then, so first the exaltation of Christ, then the exaltation of history's end, of those who have already fully united to Christ in this life, and then the full completion at the end of all ages, when the kingdom is yielded over to the Father. At this point, we arrive at verse 28, which says, and when all things have been subordinated to him, then will the Son himself also be subordinated to the one who has subordinated all things to him, so that God may be all in all. After all, Paul speaks on more than one occasion of judgment to come, but it seems worth noting that the only picture he actually provides of the final reckoning is found in 1 Corinthians 3:11 through 15, which says, if the work that someone has built endures, that one will receive a reward. If someone's work should be burned away, that one will suffer loss, even as by fire. This suggests that judgment is something like a refining fire that burns up all of the things that get in the way of us living in perfection and fellowship with God, the way we've been intended to live. And this even goes for someone like a mass murderer, which is an issue that tends to come up, or the sort of bigger examples of like someone like Hitler, genocidal actions. This person, let's say the mass murderer, is saved because they have gone through this process of fiery judgment and accountability, by means of which their flesh, all of the stuff that's colluded to and produces evil, has been judged and burned away. It's done away with. And this is an excruciating process. I don't want to overlook this. This is going to be painful. Only by being subjected to that excruciatingly painful, and it is excruciating, yet merciful love of God, is that person saved. So I would talk about judgment in terms of this kind of strict accountability, where there is going to be a reckoning, where we're held responsible for our actions in this life. And part of that accountability is being confronted with all the horrible ways we've colluded with sin and death. There's nothing particularly easy about getting your flesh burned off by the fires of God's loving justice. And I really want to be clear about that. It's not like the mass murderer gets a free pass. He has been judged and will be judged and will be cleansed of the awful things he would otherwise bring into the eschaton, bring into God's kingdom. So that loving and painful refining fire is how I would talk about the final judgment. And I think that's how Paul is doing so in 1 Corinthians. So the question of universalism and the excommunication of Origen, and why early church and early fathers didn't seem to hold to a universalist position. So is universalism heretical? Especially since we have Origen getting excommunicated. The first thing I would say is that Origen wasn't excommunicated for universalism. No good Orthodox scholar actually thinks that. And the same goes for the so-called condemnation of apokatastasis in the Fifth Ecumenical Council. No good scholar actually thinks that. No one thinks that actually happened, and it didn't even condemn Origen. There was something called Origenism that was separately condemned and then was added into the minutes of the council, but there's no evidence that the council even addressed it. So it was never originally a part of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. What was condemned then was not universalism as such, or Origen really to begin with, except in a kind of caricature, but a particular metaphysical narrative that seems to have been based on the thought of Barsudeli. So that's a historical error to say that Origen was excommunicated for universalism, or that universalism was condemned, or something like that. It's a common one, but it's a historical error nonetheless. No, we actually have evidence that universalism was likely more widespread early on than most people think, although, of course, in the grand scheme of the history of the Christian tradition, it's been a minority voice. We have someone like Gregory the Great indicating its really strong presence during his time, and the work of Ilaria Ramelli, whose work I'll link in the description below. She indicates the clear presence among the patristic sources of universalism, and that there really was a diversity of thinking eschatologically on this matter, which came to be kind of muted through later centuries. Now, so I hope that addresses Carlos's concerns. Now, I'll eventually do a video for the positive case for universalism, but know that it has never been condemned as heretical, nor was Origen excommunicated for reasons relating to that. Thank you for watching this third audience question video. I hope you learned something. I hope you were challenged by some things I said. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And with that, this has been Apocalypse Here, Christianity You Can Live With.